The grand mansion stood on top of the hill like a crown, its windows gleaming in the morning sun. It was the kind of house most people only saw in movies or magazines. 3 stories tall with perfect gardens and a driveway lined with expensive cars. This was the home of Richard Blackwell, one of the richest men in the city. Inside those walls worked Sophia Martinez, a young woman who had traveled a very long way from home. At 26, Sophia had already lived many lives. Back in her small village in the Philippines, she had been known as the girl with the magic fingers. Now, in America, she was just another maid in a uniform, dusting furniture that cost more than her family's entire home. This particular morning started like any other. Sophia woke before sunrise in her small room in the servants' quarters, washed her face with cold water to chase away sleep, and pulled her long black hair into a neat bun. Her uniform hung pressed and ready on the back of her door, a simple, gray dress with a white apron. Nothing fancy, nothing that would make her stand out. That was exactly how Mr. Blackwell wanted his staff, invisible until needed. "Another day, another dollar," she whispered to herself, a phrase she had learned from Tom, the gardener who had been working at the mansion for over 15 years. It helped her remember why she was here, so far from everyone she loved. Sophia moved quietly through the massive house, starting her morning routine. The floors needed polishing, the windows needed cleaning, and the dozens of shiny objects Mr. Blackwell collected needed dusting. As she worked, she hummed softly to herself, old songs her grandmother had taught her when she was small. "I don't pay you to make noise," came a cold voice from behind her. Sophia jumped, nearly knocking over a crystal vase worth more than she made in 3 months. Richard Blackwell stood in the doorway of the living room, already dressed in a perfectly tailored suit despite the early hour. His hair was dark with touches of gray at the temples, and his face might have been handsome if it ever softened with a smile. "I'm sorry, sir," Sophia said quickly, lowering her eyes. "It won't happen again." He looked at her for a moment longer, then checked his expensive watch. "The breakfast room needs to be set for 8 people. I have a business meeting at 9. Make sure everything is perfect." "Yes, sir. Right away." He turned to leave, but paused. "And Sophia?" No more humming. After he left, Sophia let out the breath she'd been holding. Working for Richard Blackwell for the past 6 months had taught her to be careful, to be quiet, to be invisible. The man had more money than she could imagine, but he seemed to have forgotten how to be kind somewhere along the way. Still, this job paid 3 times what she could make anywhere else, and every dollar she saved brought her family back home one step closer to a better life. Her younger brother needed money for college, and her mother's health wasn't good. The weight of these responsibilities pressed down on Sophia's shoulders every day. As she prepared the breakfast room, setting out the fine china and polishing the silver until it gleamed, Sophia thought about the letter she had received yesterday from her mother. Things were hard back home. The roof was leaking again, and medicine prices had gone up. She would need to send more money this month, which meant her own dreams would have to wait even longer. And she did have dreams, though she kept them hidden away like treasured photographs. Before life had gotten so hard, before her father had passed away leaving the family with nothing but debts, Sophia had been a promising pianist. Old Mr. Reyes, who had once played in concert halls in Manila before retiring to their village, had spotted her talent when she was just 6 years old. "This child has a gift," he had told her parents. "It would be a crime not to nurture it." For 9 wonderful years, Sophia had studied with Mr. Reyes, practicing on his old upright piano whenever she could escape her chores. Her fingers would dance across the keys, bringing to life the music of Chopin, Beethoven, and Liszt. Mr. Reyes had given her his precious books of sheet music, saying her talent deserved the very best. "One day, you will play on a real concert, grand piano," he had promised. "One day people will pay just to hear you play." But then her father died, and suddenly there was no money for food, let alone piano lessons. The books of sheet music were sold to pay for his funeral. Sophia's hands, once reserved for creating beautiful melodies, were now put to work washing other people's clothes, cooking other people's meals, cleaning other people's homes. 10 years had passed since she had last played a proper piano. which was why the grand piano in Richard Blackwell's main hall was both a joy and a torture to Sophia. It sat there gleaming black and perfect, never played, never touched except when she dusted it. Sometimes, when she was sure no one was around, she would lift the cover and look at the keys, pristine ivory and ebony, waiting for fingers to bring them to life. But she never dared to play. Mr. Blackwell had made it very clear on her first day. You are not to touch anything unless it's to clean it. After preparing the breakfast room, Sophia hurried to the kitchen to help Mrs. Chen, the cook, prepare the meal for Mr. Blackwell's business guests. You look tired, Mrs. Chen said, handing Sophia a cup of coffee. Unlike Mr. Blackwell, Mrs. Chen was kind. She had been with the household for 20 years and had seen staff come and go. Did you stay up late writing letters again? Sophia nodded, sipping the hot coffee gratefully. My brother Miguel starts college next month if we can make the payments. Mrs. Chen smiled. You're a good sister. Your family is lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have this job, Sophia replied, though some days it didn't feel like luck at all. The morning passed in a blur of activity. Mr. Blackwell's business associates arrived exactly at 9, men in expensive suits with hard eyes and women with perfect hair and sharp smiles. Sophia served them coffee and pastries, moving silently around the table, refilling cups before they were empty, removing plates as soon as they were cleared. None of them looked at her. None, except one older gentleman who said, "Thank you," when she poured his coffee. The simple words of acknowledgement almost made her drop the pot in surprise. As the meeting dragged on, Sophia continued her cleaning in the nearby rooms, keeping an ear out in case she was needed. She could hear Mr. Blackwell's voice rising and falling as he talked about investments and profit margins, and things that meant nothing to her. Later, as the guests were leaving, Sophia overheard one of them commenting on the piano in the hall. Beautiful instrument, Richard. Steinway, isn't it? Do you play? Mr. Blackwell laughed. Hardly. It came with the house. Looks good though, doesn't it? Shame to let it sit there unused. You should hire someone to play during your parties. Perhaps, Mr. Blackwell replied dismissively, though I prefer conversation to entertainment at my gatherings. When the house was finally quiet again, Sophia found herself drawn to the piano. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, catching the dust motes dancing in the air, and illuminating the instrument like a spotlight on a stage. Mrs. Chen had gone to the market. Tom was working in the back gardens. Mr. Blackwell was in his office on a phone call. No one would know if she just... Sophia glanced around nervously, then slowly, reverently, lifted the cover. The keys seemed to glow, calling to her fingers. Before she could think better of it, she sat down on the bench, her back straight the way Mr. Reyes had taught her all those years ago. For a moment she just sat there, her hands hovering above the keys, remembering. Then so softly it was barely audible, she pressed down on middle C. The note rang out, pure and perfect. Tears sprang to her eyes at the sound. She quickly closed the cover and stood up, her heart pounding. Even that one note felt like a betrayal of Mr. Blackwell's rules, but also like coming home after a very long journey. As she turned to leave, she noticed a framed photograph on a nearby table she hadn't paid attention to before. It showed a younger Richard Blackwell standing next to a beautiful woman who was seated at this very piano. The woman was smiling, her hands poised above the keys, while Richard looked at her with an expression Sophia had never seen on his face before. Pure love. Sophia wondered who the woman was and where she had gone. There were no signs of a woman living in this house now. No personal touches, no warmth, nothing but expensive things perfectly arranged but never enjoyed. Perhaps there was more to Richard Blackwell than his cold exterior suggested. Perhaps there was a reason why a man who didn't play kept such a beautiful piano perfectly tuned but never touched. As she continued with her chores, Sophia found herself wondering about the life her employer had lived before she knew him. And somewhere deep inside, a forgotten dream began to stir again, like a seed long buried suddenly feeling the warmth of the sun. The weeks passed quickly at the Blackwell mansion. Sophia settled into a routine that kept her busy from sunrise to sunset. She cleaned, She cooked alongside Mrs. Chen. She pressed Mr. Blackwell's shirts exactly the way he liked them, and she sent money home to her family every Friday without fail. Life wasn't exciting, but it was stable, something Sophia had learned to value above most things. What no one knew was that Sophia had started visiting the grand piano in the main hall during her lunch breaks. She never played, not really. She would simply sit on the bench, lift the cover, and press a single key, letting the perfect tone fill the empty room for a brief moment before closing it again. It was like visiting an old friend she wasn't allowed to speak to, but could at least see from a distance. One afternoon, as she was dusting the bookshelves in Mr. Blackwell's study, she noticed a collection of music books tucked away on a bottom shelf. Her heart skipped a beat as she pulled one out carefully. It was a book of Chopin's nocturnes, the very same collection Mr. Reyes had used to teach her years ago. "What are you doing?" Sophia jumped, nearly dropping the book. Mr. Blackwell stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. "I'm sorry, sir," she said quickly, returning the book to its place. "I was just dusting." He walked into the room, his footsteps heavy on the wooden floor. "You seemed very interested in that book." Sophia kept her eyes down. "It reminded me of something from home. That's all." For a moment, Mr. Blackwell said nothing. Then, surprisingly, he asked, "Do you play?" The question hung in the air between them. Sophia hesitated, unsure how to answer. "I used to," she finally admitted. "A long time ago." Mr. Blackwell nodded, slowly, as if confirming something to himself. "My wife played," he said, his voice softer than Sophia had ever heard it. That was her collection. So the woman in the photograph had been his wife. Sophia wanted to ask what had happened to her, but knew better than to pry into her employer's personal life. "She was very talented," Mr. Blackwell continued, almost as if speaking to himself. "The piano was hers. I keep it tuned because—" He stopped abruptly, his face hardening again. "Finish the dusting and then help Mrs. Chen prepare for tonight. I'm having 12 guests for dinner." With that, he was gone, leaving Sophia wondering about the man who employed her and the wife who was no longer there. The dinner party that night was bigger than usual. Mr. Blackwell had invited important business associates and their spouses, along with a few people Sophia recognized from newspaper photos: a famous retired judge, a well-known doctor, and the dean of the local university. The dining room glittered with crystal and silver, and Mrs. Chen had outdone herself with a 5-course meal that had taken 2 days to prepare. Sophia and 2 other staff members hired for the evening moved silently around the table, serving food and pouring wine. The conversation flowed easily among the guests. Talk of business deals and stock prices, vacation homes and private schools. It was a world as foreign to Sophia as the moon. As the dinner progressed, Sophia noticed one guest in particular, an older gentleman with kind eyes and silver hair, who kept thanking the servers whenever they refilled his glass or brought a new course. When dessert was being served, she overheard him asking Mr. Blackwell about the piano in the main hall. "Do you still play, Richard? I remember Elizabeth was quite the pianist." A hush fell over the table at the mention of the name. Mr. Blackwell's face tightened almost imperceptibly. "No," he said shortly. "The piano is just for show these days." Another guest, a woman dripping in diamonds, laughed lightly. "Such a waste. You should at least have someone play during these lovely dinners of yours." "Indeed," agreed another man. "My wife and I were at the Hendersons last week, and they had a young man from Juilliard playing Debussy. Created quite the atmosphere." Mr. Blackwell swirled the wine in his glass. "I don't particularly enjoy having strangers in my home." "Then perhaps one of your staff?" suggested the diamond woman, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on Sophia. "What about your maid there? Can you play, dear?" All eyes turned to Sophia, who froze with a dessert plate in her hand. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment. Before she could respond, Mr. Blackwell laughed, a sound so rarely heard in the mansion that it startled everyone. "My maid? Play the piano? I highly doubt that." The guests chuckled along with him, amused by the very idea. all except the silver-haired man who looked at Sophia with curious eyes. Actually, Mr. Blackwell continued, a strange gleam in his eye. Why don't we find out? He turned to Sophia. You told me this morning that you used to play. Here's your chance to show us. Sophia's heart hammered in her chest. This wasn't a friendly invitation. It was a challenge, perhaps even a form of entertainment for his guests. She could feel 12 pairs of eyes on her, waiting expectantly. It's been many years, sir, she managed to say. All the more reason to see what you can do, Mr. Blackwell insisted, standing up. Everyone, shall we move to the main hall for some entertainment? The guests murmured their approval, pushing back their chairs and following Mr. Blackwell. Out of the dining room, Sophia remained frozen in place until Mrs. Chen appeared at her side. What's happening? The cook whispered. He wants me to play the piano for his guests, Sophia replied, her voice barely audible. Mrs. Chen's eyes widened. Can you? Once, maybe. But it's been 10 years, and Go, Mrs. Chen urged her. We'll clean up here. And Sophia. She squeezed the younger woman's hand. Remember who you are. Sophia took a deep breath and followed the sound of voices to the main hall, where the guests had gathered around the grand piano. Mr. Blackwell stood beside it, his hand resting on the gleaming black surface. Ah, here she is, he announced as Sophia entered the room. My maid is going to give us a performance. There was a hint of mockery in his voice that made Sophia's stomach twist. The guests looked at her with expressions ranging from amusement to pity. The woman with the diamonds whispered something behind her hand to another guest, who snickered in response. Please, sit, Mr. Blackwell said, gesturing to the piano bench as if offering a throne to a child playing dress-up. Sophia's legs felt like lead as she crossed the room. She was acutely aware of her plain uniform, her calloused hands, her place in this house as someone who served rather than someone who was served. This was not a kind invitation, but a way to put her in her place, to remind everyone, including her, of the vast difference between them. As she sat down on the bench, memories flooded back. Mr. Reyes guiding her hands on the keys, her mother's proud smile when she played at the village festival, the joy music had once brought to her life. Those memories seemed to belong to another person now, a girl who had disappeared long ago. She lifted the cover, revealing the keys she had only dared to touch one at a time for weeks. Now she was expected to make them sing together, to prove something to these people who had probably never had to worry about where their next meal would come from, or how to pay for a sick parent's medicine. Well, Mr. Blackwell prompted when she hesitated. Show us what you can do. Sophia placed her fingers on the keys, surprised to find they remembered where to go even after all this time. She began with the only piece she could think of, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the first serious piece Mr. Reyes had taught her. The first few notes were hesitant, her fingers stiff and uncertain. Someone in the audience coughed. Another whispered something. Mr. Blackwell stood with his arms crossed, watching her with cold satisfaction, as if his point about her inadequacy was already being made. But then something happened. As Sophia continued to play, the years fell away. Her fingers remembered what her mind had forgotten. The music began to flow, softly at first, then with growing confidence. The nocturne filled the room with its gentle, dreamy melody. A song of moonlight and quiet hope. The whispering stopped. The coughing ceased. The room grew still except for the sound of the piano under Sophia's touch. She closed her eyes, letting the music take her back home, back to the person she had once been. She played not for the wealthy guests or for Mr. Blackwell with his cruel challenge. She played for herself, for the girl who had once dreamed of concert halls, for her family so far away, for Mrs. Chen in the kitchen who had told her to remember who she was. When the final notes of the nocturne faded away, there was complete silence. Sophia opened her eyes, suddenly aware again of where she was and what she had done. She looked up to find every face in the room staring at her in astonishment, and Mr. Blackwell, his expression was the most shocked of all. Gone was the smugness, the cold amusement. Instead, he looked as if he had seen a ghost. The silver-haired man was the first to break the silence. He stepped forward, his eyes bright with something Sophia couldn't quite name. "My dear," he said, gently, "would you play another?" Sophia's hands hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. The silver-haired man had asked her to play another piece, but she felt frozen under the gaze of so many stunned faces. She glanced at Mr. Blackwell, whose expression had transformed from smug certainty to complete disbelief. "Please," the silver-haired man encouraged. "If you would." Taking a deep breath, Sophia turned back to the piano. What should she play? Her mind raced through the pieces she had once known by heart. Without consciously deciding, her fingers began to move, and the opening notes of Liszt's Liebestraum filled the room. This piece was more difficult, with its delicate runs and dramatic crescendos. It had been the last piece Mr. Reyes had taught her before she'd been forced to stop her lessons. She had never mastered it then. Her young hands, struggling with its technical demands, but now somehow her adult fingers found their way, as if they had been practicing all these years in her dreams. As she played, Sophia forgot about the wealthy audience, about Mr. Blackwell, about being a maid in a uniform. She was transported, back to her village, to the small room with the upright piano where Mr. Reyes had shown her how music could tell stories without words. The piece built to its emotional peak, her hands dancing across the keys with increasing confidence. When she reached the final gentle notes, she let them linger in the air before lifting her hands from the keyboard. The silence that followed lasted only a moment before the room erupted in applause. Sophia blinked, coming back to herself, suddenly remembering where she was and who she was supposed to be. "Extraordinary," the silver-haired man said, stepping forward. "Simply extraordinary." The woman with diamonds was dabbing at her eyes with a silk handkerchief. "I've heard professionals play that piece with less feeling," she admitted, her earlier condescension completely gone. Sophia stood up, smoothing down her uniform, unsure what to do. She looked toward Mr. Blackwell, expecting anger at how she had overstepped her place. Instead, he was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read, a mixture of shock, confusion, and something that looked almost like pain. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked, his voice unusually quiet. Before Sophia could answer, the silver-haired man stepped between them. "Allow me to introduce myself properly," he said, extending his hand to Sophia. "I'm David Williams, Dean of the National Conservatory of Music." Sophia's eyes widened as she hesitantly shook his hand. "Your playing is remarkable," Dean Williams continued. "Especially for someone who hasn't had formal training, I assume." I had lessons as a child," Sophia managed to say. "Until I was 15. My teacher was a retired concert pianist who lived in our village." "And you haven't played since?" he asked, clearly astonished. Sophia shook her head. Today was the first time in 10 years. A murmur of amazement rippled through the guests. "That's impossible," someone whispered. 10 years without playing, and she can perform Liszt like that?" another added. Dean Williams was looking at her with growing excitement. "Your teacher, what was his name?" "Mr. Reyes. Antonio Reyes." The dean's face lit up with recognition. "Antonio Reyes. He was legendary in the Philippines before he retired. I heard him play in Manila 30 years ago." He turned to address the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are in the presence of exceptional talent. Antonio Reyes wouldn't have wasted his time on anyone less than extraordinary." Sophia felt her cheeks, burning with embarrassment and a touch of pride. No one had spoken about her musical ability in so long that she had almost forgotten that part of herself existed. "Tell me," Dean Williams asked gently, "why did you stop playing?" The room grew, quiet again, waiting for her answer. Sophia swallowed hard, looking down at her hands. Hands that had just brought such beautiful music into the room but were more accustomed to scrubbing floors and washing dishes. "My father died," she said simply. "We had no money. I had to work, to help support my family." She didn't add the rest, how they had sold her music books and how the village pawnshop owner had given them almost nothing for them. How Mr. Reyes had cried when she told him she couldn't continue her lessons. How she had promised herself she would return to music someday, a promise that had grown fainter with each passing year. And now you work here, as a maid, Dean Williams stated, glancing at Mr. Blackwell. Yes, sir. For 6 months now. One of the guests, a woman in a red dress, approached the piano. Would you play something else for us? Something happy this time? Sophia looked to Mr. Blackwell, silently asking permission. After a moment, he nodded, his face still unreadable. She sat down again and began to play a lively Mozart sonata, her fingers flying over the keys with increasing confidence. As she played, she noticed from the corner of her eye that Mr. Blackwell had slipped away from the room. The guests stayed for another hour, requesting pieces and applauding each performance. Sophia played everything she could remember, some perfectly, others with small mistakes that no one seemed to mind. For that hour, she wasn't a maid serving drinks, but an artist sharing her gift. When the guests finally began to leave, many shook her hand or patted her shoulder as if she were one of them. Dean Williams was the last to go. You have a rare talent, he told her earnestly. It would be a tragedy to let it go to waste again. He handed her a business card. Call my office. I want to discuss possibilities for you at the conservatory. Sophia stared at the card. Sir, I can't afford— There are scholarships for exceptional students, he interrupted. And you, my dear, are exceptional. With a warm smile, he added, Antonio Reyes would be proud, before following the other guests out. When everyone had gone, Sophia sat alone in the grand hall, the business card clutched in her hand. Her mind was spinning. Was this real? Could she actually have a second chance at her dream? The sound of footsteps made her look up. Mr. Blackwell had returned, now holding a glass of whiskey. He looked tired, the usual sharpness in his eyes replaced by something softer, more vulnerable. You never mentioned you could play like that, he said, sitting in a chair across from the piano. You never asked, sir, Sophia replied quietly. And I haven't played in so long I wasn't sure I still could. He took a sip from his glass. My wife Elizabeth loved that piano. She played every day. He stared into his drink. After she died, I couldn't bear to hear anyone else play it, but I couldn't bear to get rid of it either. Sophia remained silent, understanding now why the piano was kept in perfect condition but never used. How long has it been? She asked gently. 3 years, next month. He looked up at her. Cancer, it was quick at least. The hardness she was accustomed to seeing in his face was gone, replaced by grief still raw despite the passage of time. I'm sorry, she said simply. Mr. Blackwell nodded, then finished his drink in one swallow. Dean Williams gave you his card. Yes, sir. He mentioned scholarships. He did, but you send money to your family, Mr. Blackwell finished for her. You can't study and support them at the same time. Sophia was surprised he knew about the money she sent home. My brother is starting college soon, and my mother needs medicine for her heart condition, she explained. I can't let them down, Mr. Blackwell stood up, placing his empty glass on a side table. We'll discuss this tomorrow. It's late and it's been an unexpected evening. As he turned to leave, he paused. You play beautifully, Sophia. Like Elizabeth. The words seemed to cost him something to say, as if he were giving away a piece of himself. Thank you, sir, she whispered. After he left, Sophia remained at the piano for a long time, her fingers lightly touching the keys without pressing them. Tonight had changed something, both within her and, she suspected, within Mr. Blackwell as well. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a different future, one where she wasn't just a maid in a rich man's house, but a musician, in her own right. It seemed impossible, a dream too fragile to hold on to. Yet Dean Williams' card was real in her hand, and the memory of the music she had created tonight was real in her heart. Eventually, she closed the piano cover and stood up. As she did, she noticed a photograph on the wall she hadn't paid attention to before, a younger Mr. Blackwell standing beside a beautiful woman seated at this very piano, Elizabeth. She was smiling at the camera, her hands poised above the keys. her eyes full of life. "I hope you don't mind that I played your piano," Sophia whispered to the photograph. "I think maybe it wanted to be played again." She turned off the lights and made her way back to her small room in the servants' quarters, the events of the evening replaying in her mind. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions. But tonight had brought something she had lost long ago. Hope. Sleep didn't come easily to Sophia that night. She lay awake in her small bed, replaying the evening, over and over in her mind. Her fingers moved unconsciously, practicing phantom piano keys on her blanket. The faces of the guests, their surprised expressions, Dean Williams's card tucked safely in her uniform pocket, Mr. Blackwell's unexpected vulnerability, all of it swirled in her thoughts until dawn began to peek through her window. When she finally rose to begin her workday, something felt different. The other household staff treated her differently too. Mrs. Chen gave her an extra-large portion of breakfast with a knowing smile. Tom the gardener, who rarely spoke to anyone, stopped her in the hallway to say he'd heard about her playing and wished he could have been there to listen. "You're a dark horse, aren't you?" he said with a wink before heading outside to tend to the roses. Sophia went about her morning duties, wondering when Mr. Blackwell would summon her for the conversation he had promised. Would he be angry in the light of day? Would he see her? Musical ability as a betrayal somehow? A secret she had kept? Or worse, would he simply pretend nothing had happened and expect her to do the same? It wasn't until after lunch that the call came. "Mr. Blackwell would like to see you in his study," Mrs. Chen told her, a hint of excitement in her usually calm voice. Sophia's heart raced as she made her way to the study, pausing outside the heavy wooden door to smooth her uniform and take a deep breath. She knocked gently. "Come in," came the response. Mr. Blackwell was seated behind his large desk, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed some papers. He looked up when she entered, removing his glasses and gesturing to the chair across from him. "Sit down, please." This itself was unusual. In 6 months of employment, Sophia had never been invited to sit in his presence. "I've been thinking about last night," he began, folding his hands on the desk. "About your playing." "I hope I didn't overstep, sir," Sophia said quickly. He shook his head. "No. If anything, I'm the one who should apologize." Sophia blinked in surprise. In all her time working for Richard Blackwell, she had never heard him apologize to anyone, least of all a member of his staff. "I put you on the spot too. Well, to make a point," he continued, looking somewhat uncomfortable with his own admission. "I never expected you to play the way you did." There was a moment of silence between them. Outside the window, birds chirped in the garden trees, and somewhere in the distance, Tom's lawnmower hummed steadily. "Dean Williams called me this morning," Mr. Blackwell said finally. "He was quite insistent about your talent." Sophia's hands tightened in her lap. "He was very kind." "Kind, perhaps, but not exaggerating. I may not be a musician, but even I could tell your playing was exceptional." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "He wants you to audition for a special scholarship program at the conservatory. Normally, these auditions happen once a year, but he's willing to make an exception." Hope bloomed in Sophia's chest, only to be quickly tempered by reality. "Sir, I appreciate the opportunity, but as I mentioned last night, my family depends on the money I send home. I can't." Mr. Blackwell held up a hand to stop her. "I'm aware of your situation. Dean Williams explained the scholarship would cover tuition, but not living expenses, and you wouldn't be able to work full-time while studying at the conservatory." Sophia nodded sadly. It was as she thought, a beautiful dream, but not a practical one. "That's why I have a proposition for you," Mr. Blackwell continued, surprising her. "You could continue to live here, in your current room. Your basic expenses would be covered, and I would match whatever you've been sending to your family in the Philippines each month." Sophia stared at him, certain she had misheard. "Sir, in exchange," he went on, "you would no longer work as a full-time maid. You would focus on your studies at the conservatory. However, I would ask that you play the piano here in the evening several times a week." "Play for you?" Sophia asked, trying trying to understand. A shadow of grief passed across Mr. Blackwell's face. Elizabeth, my wife, she used to play every evening. The house has been too quiet since she passed. He cleared his throat. I'd forgotten how much music filled this place until last night. Sophia was speechless. This was the last thing she had expected when she'd been called to his study. You don't have to decide right away, Mr. Blackwell added, his businesslike tone returning. Take a day or two to think it over. Why would you do this for me? Sophia asked, the question escaping before she could stop herself. Mr. Blackwell was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. When Elizabeth was diagnosed, we knew her time was limited. She made me promise to find joy again after she was gone. His eyes drifted to a small photo of his wife on the desk. I haven't kept that promise very well. I've just been existing. But last night, hearing the piano again, he looked back at Sophia. It reminded me of what she wanted for me, for this house. He straightened in his chair, composing himself. Besides, it would be a crime to waste talent like yours. Elizabeth would never have forgiven me if I let that happen when I had the means to help. Sophia felt tears prickling behind her eyes. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it, and that you'll call Dean Williams to arrange that audition, regardless of your decision about my offer. She nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. That's all for now, Mr. Blackwell said, picking up his glasses again. Oh, and Sophia? Yes, sir? Would you mind playing something this evening? Around 7, perhaps? Nothing formal, just, it would be nice to hear the piano again. Of course, she replied, standing up. Thank you, Mr. Blackwell. As she turned to leave, he added, I think under the circumstances you could call me Richard. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Sophia moved through her duties mechanically, her mind elsewhere. She called Dean Williams from the kitchen, phoned during her afternoon break, her hands shaking as she dialed the number on his card. The dean was delighted to hear from her and scheduled an audition for the following week. He seemed unsurprised when she mentioned Mr. Blackwell's, Richard's, offer. He and Elizabeth were major supporters of the conservatory, Dean Williams explained. She was on our board of directors for many years. Richard withdrew from much of that involvement after her passing. It's good to hear he's reconnecting with the music world, even in this small way. By evening, Sophia had made her decision, though. She could scarcely believe the turn her life had taken in less than 24 hours. At exactly 7 o'clock, she sat down at the grand piano in the main hall. She knew Richard was listening from his study, the door left slightly ajar. She began with Debussy's Clair de Lune, its gentle, flowing notes filling the house. As she played, she thought about her family back home, how proud they would be when she told them about this opportunity. Her brother could still go to college, her mother would still get her medicine, and Sophia could reclaim the dream she had been forced to set aside so many years ago. When she finished the Debussy piece, she heard the study door open. Richard appeared in the hallway, holding a glass of wine and looking more relaxed than she had ever seen him. Would you like me to play something else? Sophia asked. Please, he said, sitting in an armchair where he could see both her and the piano. Whatever you'd like. Sophia turned back to the keys and began Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. As the famous melancholy notes drifted through the room, she noticed Richard close his eyes, his face softening with memories. For the next hour, Sophia played piece after piece. Some she remembered perfectly, others she stumbled through, relearning as she went. Richard sat quietly, sometimes with his eyes closed, sometimes watching her hands move across the keyboard. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The music said everything that needed to be said. When Sophia finally stopped, her fingers tired but her heart full, Richard stood up. You've made your decision, haven't you? He asked. She nodded. If the offer still stands, I'd like to accept it. Good, he said simply. Then after a pause, Elizabeth would have liked you very much, Sophia. She believed music was the purest form of communication between souls. She sounds like a wise woman. The wisest I've ever known, Richard agreed. Until you audition at the conservatory. Would you like to use her music books for practice? They're gathering dust in the study. I would be honored, Sophia said sincerely. As she made her way back to her room that night, Sophia felt as though she was walking between two lives. The one she had known as a maid, focused only on survival and supporting her family, and a new one opening before her, where her forgotten talents might have room to grow and flourish. She thought of Mr. Reyes and wished she could tell him that his faith in her had not been misplaced after all. She thought of her mother and brother and how she would call them tomorrow with news they would scarcely believe. And she thought of Richard Blackwell, a man she had feared and now was beginning to understand, someone who had lost his joy and might, through an act of unexpected kindness, be finding his way back to it. Sometimes, Sophia reflected as she drifted toward sleep, life's most beautiful melodies come after the longest silences. 2 years passed, like the turning pages of a well-loved book. Seasons changed. Holidays came and went, and the Blackwell mansion transformed from a cold, silent place into a home filled with music. Sophia's audition at the National Conservatory had gone better than anyone could have hoped. Dean Williams had been so impressed that he'd offered her not only a full scholarship, but also a spot in their advanced program, despite her years away from formal training. Her days now followed a new rhythm. Mornings and afternoons at the conservatory, evenings practicing on Elizabeth's piano while Richard listened from his favorite chair. On this particular spring afternoon, Sophia sat in a practice room at the conservatory, working on a particularly challenging passage of a Rachmaninoff concerto. Her first major recital was only 2 weeks away, and though her teachers assured her she was more than ready, butterflies danced in her stomach whenever she thought about it. A knock on the door interrupted her practice. She looked up to see Dean Williams smiling at her. That's coming along beautifully, he said. But I think you've practiced enough for today. There's someone here to see you. Curious, Sophia followed him to the main lobby, where a small woman with gray-streaked hair and familiar eyes stood looking around in wonder at the grand building. Mama? Sophia gasped, hardly believing her eyes. Her mother turned, her face lighting up with joy. They rushed toward each other, embracing as if they might never let go. It had been nearly 3 years since they had seen each other in person, though they spoke on the phone every week. How are you here? Sophia asked, wiping tears from her cheeks. You didn't tell me you were coming. It was meant to be a surprise, her mother explained, holding Sophia's face between her hands as if to make sure she was real. Your Mr. Blackwell arranged everything, the plane tickets, the visa, even a car from the airport. Sophia was stunned. Richard had mentioned nothing about this. Miguel wanted to come too, her mother continued. But his university exams are next week. He sends his love and says he'll be at your recital in spirit. Dean Williams quietly excused himself, leaving mother and daughter to their reunion. Sophia gathered her things and they took a taxi back to the Blackwell mansion, talking the entire way about Miguel's studies, about life back home in the Philippines, about Sophia's progress at the conservatory. And you're Mr. Blackwell, her mother said thoughtfully as they approached the mansion gates. You write about him often in your letters. He seems like a very different man from the one you described when you first started working for him. Sophia looked out the window at the house that had been her home for nearly 3 years now. He is different, she said softly. Or maybe he's finally becoming himself again. When they arrived, Richard was waiting in the entrance hall. He greeted Sophia's mother warmly, insisting she call him Richard rather than Mr. Blackwell. Your daughter has brought music back to this house, he told her. I can never thank her enough for that. And you have given my daughter back her dream, Sophia's mother replied. For that, it is I who can never thank you enough. That evening, after showing her mother to the guest room Richard had prepared, Sophia found him in the main hall standing by the piano. Thank you, she said simply, for bringing my mother here. It means more than I can say. Richard smiled, something he did much more frequently these days. I thought she should be here for your first major recital. It's an important moment. "I'm terrified," Sophia admitted. "You'll be magnificent," Richard assured her. "You always are." They had developed an easy friendship over the past 2 years, built on their shared love of music and the quiet understanding between two people who had both lost something precious. Richard was still a private man, often wrapped in his own thoughts, but the cold, demanding employer was gone, replaced by someone more human, more approachable. "Will you play something for your mother?" he asked. "I think she'd like to hear how far you've come." Sophia nodded and sat at the piano. Her mother came downstairs just as she began to play a Filipino folk song that Mr. Reyes had arranged for piano many years ago. It was a simple piece compared to what she studied at the conservatory, but it carried the warmth and memories of home in every note. When she finished, her mother was crying quietly. "Antonio would be so proud," she said, referring to Mr. Reyes. "He always said you were his most gifted student." "I wish he could be here," Sophia said, feeling a pang of sadness for her old teacher who had passed away the previous year. "He is here," her mother insisted, placing a hand over her heart, "in every note you play." The next 2 weeks flew by in a whirlwind of final preparations. Sophia practiced diligently, but also took time to show her mother around the city. Richard joined them occasionally, always insisting they take his car and driver rather than public transportation. The night before the recital, Sophia couldn't sleep. She crept downstairs to the piano thinking she might practice one last time, only to find Richard already there, looking at old photographs spread out on a table. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, not surprised to see her. She shook her head and joined him. The photographs were of Elizabeth at the piano, Elizabeth in concert dress on a stage, Elizabeth laughing in the garden of the mansion. "She would have been 45 tomorrow," Richard said quietly. Sophia hadn't known. "I'm sorry. We can postpone the recital." "No," Richard interrupted firmly. "Absolutely not. Elizabeth would have loved that your recital falls on her birthday. She always said music was the best celebration of life." He picked up one of the photos and handed it to Sophia. It showed Elizabeth sitting at the very piano that now belonged to Sophia in so many ways. "I want you to have this," he said, "to take with you tomorrow." Sophia accepted the photograph, touched by the gesture. "I'll play for her too," she promised. Richard nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "She sent you, I think," he said after a moment. "Not in any supernatural way, but it can't be coincidence that you came into this house with your gift for music, just when the silence was becoming unbearable." "Maybe she did," Sophia agreed softly. The next day, the concert hall at the conservatory was filled to capacity. Sophia peeked through the curtains, her heart racing when she saw how many people had come. Her mother sat in the front row next to Richard, both of them beaming with pride. Dean Williams and several of her professors were there, along with many students and music lovers from across the city. In the small dressing room backstage, Sophia placed Elizabeth's photograph next to a worn picture of her family. Two worlds, once so far apart, now connected through her and through music. When it was time, she walked onto the stage in a simple blue dress that Richard had insisted on buying for the occasion. The spotlight felt warm on her face as she bowed to the audience, then took her place at the grand piano. For a moment, she was transported back to that night 2 years ago when she had played for Richard's dinner guests, terrified and certain she would fail. How far she had come since then, how much had changed. She began with Bach, her fingers moving confidently across the keys. The piece was technically challenging but also joyful, full of life and possibility. From there she moved to Chopin, the composer who had first captured her heart as a child under Mr. Reyes's tutelage. As she played, Sophia felt as though every person who had touched her life was somehow present. Mr. Reyes with his patient guidance, her father whose death had interrupted her path, but whose memory had given her strength, her brother Miguel studying hard to create his own future, her mother who had sacrificed so much, Elizabeth whom she had never met but whose spirit seemed to fill the hall, and Richard, who had first seen her as merely a maid, but now looked at her with the pride of someone who had discovered a rare treasure. For her final piece, Sophia had chosen Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, a piece about overcoming darkness and finding one's way back to light. It was incredibly demanding, pushing the limits of her still developing skills. But as she played, something magical happened. The years of lost practice, the time away from music, all seemed to fall away. Her hands knew exactly where to go. Her heart knew exactly what the music needed to say. When the final chord resounded through the hall, there was a moment of complete silence. Then the audience rose to their feet as one, applause thundering through the concert hall. Sophia stood bowing deeply, tears of joy streaming down her face. Later, at the small reception following the recital, Richard approached her, a wrapped package in his hands. A gift, he explained, to mark the occasion. Inside was a leather-bound book of blank music paper. On the first page he had written, "For Sophia, who reminded me that after silence comes music, and after loss comes new beginnings." "I don't know how to thank you," Sophia said, holding the book close, "for everything." "You already have," Richard replied. "Every time you play." Sophia's mother joined them, her eyes still shining with tears of pride. "What happens now?" she asked. "After such a triumph?" Sophia looked between her mother and Richard, her past and the unexpected bridge to her future. "Now," she said with quiet confidence, "I keep playing. This is just the beginning." And it was. In the years that followed, Sophia would go on to graduate from the conservatory with highest honors. She would perform in concert halls around the world. She would eventually start a music school of her own, providing free lessons to children from backgrounds like hers. She would write compositions that touched hearts and won awards. But she would always remember the night when a wealthy man had tried to humiliate his maid by forcing her to play the piano, and instead had set them both free. Some of life's most beautiful symphonies begin with a single unexpected note.